This episode of the podcast is brought to you by headbed.com.au. Hello, everyone. Before we dive into today's episode, I wanted to share something special. In episode 305, I interviewed Catherine Randabell, the inventor of Headbed, a product revolutionizing hair salons, especially for stroke survivors. The Headbed provides excellent neck and head support during hair washes in hairdressing salons, reducing strain and promoting better blood flow. For stroke survivors, this means lowering the risk of arterial damage and easing concerns about another stroke. It ensures a safe and enjoyable salon experience. Now, I'm thrilled to support a product that aligns with my mission of stroke prevention and safety. In our interview, Catherine explained how the headbed's ergonomic design prevents neck hyperextension, a common issue increasing the risk of stroke. With Headbed, you can feel confident and comfortable at the salon knowing your health is prioritized. If you're a stroke survivor or you know someone who is, the Headbed is a must-have for your next salon visit. Check out episode 305 for my full interview with Catherine and learn about how this product can make a difference. Now, for those in the United States, visit headbedusa.com to get yours today and enjoy peace of mind at the salon. Now, I'd also like to mention my book, The Unexpected Way That a Stroke Became the Best Thing That Happened, 10 Tools for Recovery and Personal Transformation. It features inspiring stories from 10 stroke survivors and offers hope for those on the road to recovery. For more information, visit recoveryafterstroke.com/book or search for my name, Bill Gasiamis, on Amazon. This is episode 312, and my guest today is Maria Sclafani, who experienced a stroke that was initially misdiagnosed as carpal tunnel syndrome. This insightful episode, Maria shares her remarkable journey of advocating for proper medical attention, the challenges she faced during her rehabilitation, the impact on her work, performance, and mental health, and how she managed fatigue while returning to work part-time. We also discussed the unexpected support she found in her community and the importance of empathy and understanding towards stroke survivors. Maria's story is a powerful reminder of the resilience and determination needed to navigate life after a stroke. Maria Sclafani, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. Tell me a little bit about what happened to you.
Yeah, so I worked as a faculty librarian. We call them liaison or subject librarians here. So I was working in Kansas at Wichita State University. And it was in September 2022. And it was kind of the end of September. I think it was actually September 22nd. 'Cause started September 14th, the week before. So I was in my office, so I was by myself, and I just had numbness in my left arm. And it would like happen for a few seconds and then go away, and then it would happen again, go away. I would say it happened like quite a few times, and I was kind of like trying to figure out what it was because it was strange and it never happened to me before. So I kind of like I think logically I couldn't really accept that it was a stroke because I was at the time 36 and I was in pretty good health and I didn't have any like factors or conditions or anything that would lead to the type of strokes that I had. So I decided maybe it was carpal tunnel because that can cause numbness in the arm. So I called my doctor's office, and they couldn't get me in until the following Monday. And I described the symptoms, but I said, I think it's carpal tunnel. So I like went about the rest of my day. Like I went and I had coffee with my friends. I drove home. Like I made myself dinner. Did whatever I normally do. And then that week on Friday, I had a terrible headache, and I actually left work early to go home because the headache was so bad, and I was kind of like, my job entailed, teaching and working at the reference desk and helping people, so it was very, like, I guess I would say, like, very much you had to physically be there and be able to function, and I was struggling with that a little bit, so I was, like, kind of scrambling to get my colleagues to cover my shifts at the reference desk and to, like, cover my classes for me because I didn't really know what was going on. Um, and so Friday, I went home early with this terrible headache, and I went to bed probably, like, 4 p.m. or something, and I slept for, like, 14 hours. And I did call my doctor's office on Friday, and I think they prescribed me over the phone, like a steroid. So, I eventually got the steroid and took it the next day or whatever. And then the weekend was kind of strange. Even now, it's sort of like looking back, like it doesn't really make sense, but it's understandable for someone who had like trauma to the brain and was, trying to function. I was just trying to do stuff like I normally do. So I was trying to do my laundry and cook, and like I do meal prepping on Sundays, and I couldn't, like, I messed up the recipe and I couldn't figure out what I did wrong, and I was really confused about it and kind of like frustrated and like irritable. And so then went to the doctor on Monday. She examined me, and she diagnosed me as having, a pinched nerve in my neck. Yeah. And she did the stroke protocol, so she, like, felt my arms and legs, but I wasn't, like, having a stroke at that moment. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, I don't know how helpful that was, but, so she referred me to get an MRI of my neck, but I couldn't get in to get the MRI until Sunday, and this was Monday. So, I was like, "Okay, I'm really struggling to do my job though. Like, what can you do anything for me in the meantime? Like, I don't really understand what's going on here." Um, and she kinda said, "If you want some family medical leave paperwork to be filled out, we can do that for you." But, like, I left, I was driving around. Like, I drove to work, worked a full day, like, drove home, like, whatever, and I don't think it was until Thursday that week that, I went home early, like, at lunchtime. I got a ride into work with my coworker, because he lived in my building, and I normally drive, like, a stick shift car, and I was kind of like, "I don't feel like I can figure that out, so I'll just get a ride with my coworker." So he gave me a ride into work, and then I felt sick and had this terrible headache again. And I asked another coworker to give me a ride home during lunch. And so then I was in my apartment, and I had a neighbor that I was very good friends with, and she kind of came down. She's in her 60s, and we were just chatting. She was kind of keeping me company because my coworker that drove me home couldn't stay because it was her lunch break, so she had to go back to work. So my neighbor Jesse, said, "Maria, is it possible you had a stroke? It sounds like a stroke, like, have you thought about that?" And I was like, I don't know." And so we kind of had this back and forth where she was like, "Well, I think you should go to the hospital." And I was like, "I don't think I need to do that. It's just a pinched nerve." And so then she called my doctor's office and talked to my doctor, like, through the emergency line, um, and, like, actually was able to speak to my doctor and was like, "I'm looking at Maria, she's got drooping on the left side of her face." And I was having aphasia at that point, so I was mixing up my words, and I was slurring my words also because I had the droop, on the left side of my face, and so the doctor just said, "Take her to the emergency room." So I called my parents, and I was, like, very, upset. I was also crying a lot during this period because this was, like, Basically, it lasted 8 days, from, like, a Wednesday to a Thursday.
If you've had a stroke and you're in recovery, you'll know what a scary and confusing time it can be. You're likely to have a lot of questions going through your mind. Like, how long will it take to recover? Will I actually recover? What things should I avoid in case I make matters worse? Doctors will explain things, but obviously you've never had a stroke before. You probably don't know what questions to ask. If this is you, you may be missing out on doing things that could help speed up your recovery. If you're finding yourself in that situation, stop worrying and head to recoveryafterstroke.com, where you can download a guide that will help you. It's called 7 Questions to Ask Your Doctor About Your Stroke. These 7 questions are the ones Bill wished he'd asked when he was recovering from a stroke. They'll not only help you better understand your condition, they'll help you take a more active role in your recovery. Head to the website now, recoveryafterstroke.com, and download the guide. It's free.
So I was, like, very, like, emotional. So I called my parents, and they were at the airport, and they were gonna get on a plane to go to upstate New York for a wedding. So I said, "I don't know what's wrong with me. I can't do anything." So my dad said, "If you can't do anything, go to the emergency room." And they had to then, like, get their bags. They just checked their bags, and they had to get them back and then get waitlisted for flights to Wichita to come out and see me because they live in Colorado. So, I finally made it to the emergency room. My neighbor Jesse drove me. And when I made it to the emergency room, waited around for a bit, and then when they did the MRI, they were like, "Yeah, so you've had multiple strokes. There's multiple, I think they call them infarcts, like
Mhm.
little, spots on your brain. And there's one that seems a lot older than the rest, but it looks like you've been having them for about 8 days, if you're saying that the symptoms started on Wednesday." So they determined that they were ischemic strokes. And then when my parents came, my mom told them that her family has a history of Leiden factor 5, which is a blood clotting disorder. So, I mean, I think that they were like, "Oh, like, we figured it out." So they tested me for it, but I don't have it, and my mom doesn't have it. Just her 2 brothers have it. Um, so they ruled that out. And then I ended up, because I was at one hospital, but they actually transferred me, like, from the emergency room to another hospital that had a stroke center. Um, and so I think I got better care there than I did, in the emergency room. Um, yeah, it was better. So I was there for 3 more days. They did a lot more scans and tests. They scanned my legs to see if I had any blood clots in my legs. They, did something called the TEE, where they stuck something down my throat, a camera, and then they looked at the top of my heart to see if there were any holes, which there were not. So they could rule out that, but then they also gave me an implant, a heart loop monitor that's just in my chest, kind of under the skin, and it's, like, about this big maybe, and it's a piece of metal, and it just, tracks my heart rhythm to check for atrial fibrillation.
Uh-huh.
So it syncs to, like, a cell phone, and it alerts the clinic if I have any atrial fibrillation. But I've had it in now for 2 years, and I haven't had any, so that doesn't seem like a factor. So yeah, then I just had to, like, recover,
Yeah.
you know?
Tell me about, let's go back to the very beginning, the first self-diagnosis that you made. Did you have any understanding of what stroke was, experience of anyone having had a stroke beforehand where that kind of made you rule it out? Or were you just guessing and thought that it was maybe uh, carpal tunnel? And did you know anyone with carpal tunnel?
Well, so the interesting thing about the stroke history, is that when I was in college, it was my sophomore year of college. I lived in a dormitory that was like a house. It was like a very large house. It had been like a school for girls or whatever. So there was a woman in my dorm who was about to graduate. She was a senior, and she lived on my floor. And she actually had a stroke the week of graduation. So it was a brainstem stroke caused by a blood clot. And she actually was on the floor of her room. She collapsed, and she was making automated, like, sort of strange sounds, like, I think sounds that the body was emitting that I think were she wasn't actively speaking, it was just something that was happening
Mm.
biologically, so we all spent, like, a few hours trying to figure out what's going on, we tried to get into her room, we couldn't get into her room, and later we found out that that was because she was in front of the door, but we didn't know that, and then we, like, called her room and she didn't pick up, and then there was a balcony, on the roof that we were not supposed to go to. But we did, of course. So we went out on the balcony, walked across the balcony, and looked in her windows, but her curtains were pulled down. So we ended up calling campus, I think they were called campus safety, but like whatever, campus police. And she had to break into the room through the balcony, through the window. She had to use like a knife to cut through the screen and climb in through the window, and that's when she found, Maggie, and then, like, the ambulance showed up, and it was, like, a whole mess because I guess the ambulance people locked their keys in the ambulance, so it was a long time before they were able to actually get her in the ambulance. This was in Massachusetts, it was in Western Massachusetts. It was a long time before they could get her, like, to the actual like, emergency, like, the hospital. So then they also didn't know what was going on because she was young, she was, 21, 22, and she was also, they kept asking us, like, after she was found, there were 4 of us maybe, and they were interviewing all of us and asking, like, does she drink? Does she use drugs, illegal substances, any of that? And we were like, "No, she doesn't even drink. She's sober, and she's really healthy. She used to be on the crew team, and, like, she wants to be a vet, and, like, she's planning on going to vet school after this, so, like, she's not, like, experimenting with, like, drugs or anything like that, we're pretty sure that that's not the case. And I only knew her for 1 or 2 years. No, 1 year. I only knew her for 1 year, my sophomore year.
And then you
Um,
found out that she had a stroke, and that was your first understanding of what stroke looked like. You compared yourself to that situation and you thought that you don't fit
right.
that situation.
Yeah, because it was very scary for all of us at the time because we, like, couldn't comprehend, like, that these things just happen to people, like, regardless of whether they're good or bad, or they do good things, or they do bad things, like, or they do drugs, or they don't do drugs, like, medical things just happen to people, and so I feel like we were all like, "But she doesn't drink, or she doesn't even drink, and she doesn't do drugs, and, she's so healthy, and she's got a whole plan for her life, like, after this."
Mm.
This is not good it's not good timing, she's about to graduate from college. And so when they did eventually figure out that it was, a brainstem stroke, they were trying to figure out if there had been any indicators beforehand, and the only one was that she had had soreness in her jaw. She'd been complaining about that. And that was it. And I mean, she collapsed on the floor of her dorm room.
Yeah. So your stroke, your whole situation, after 8 days of trying to work it out, you end up in hospital. How do they treat it? What's the path forward after those first 8 days?
So I was referred to a neurologist, and I was referred for physical therapy, occupational therapy, and speech therapy. And I actually was able to go to a rehab clinic in Wichita where all of the physical therapy, all of the therapies were together in one place. So it was residential, like partially residential. So some people lived there, but like I was able to go to one place and then my speech therapist, my physical therapist, and my occupational therapist could all like communicate with each other, and they all like shared information about me and like could come up with a game plan. So I did that after. And fortunately my mom chose to stay with me in my apartment in Wichita to help me. Um because we weren't really sure if I could legally drive. And we didn't really get clear answers from anyone.
Mhm.
They told us to ask the occupational therapist. And the occupational therapist said, I don't know. You have a driver's license, so I don't know. Like, so I had those therapies for a few months. I had to go on family medical leave from the university um, for like a life-threatening, thing. And so I went down to working part-time. Um, so 4 hours a day.
And how did
Um,
that feel? What was that like going and working part-time, and how did you get through it?
Um, well, it was so the thing about this is, my parents were there, of course, and they were helping me. That according to them, they were trying to get me to relax and just like deal with the fact that I have had multiple strokes and, they're cryptogenic at that point. They didn't know what the cause was. And I just had rehab and I had a good reason not to go back to work for a while. But I wouldn't do that. I kept, trying to get into my email, and then I would get the password wrong, and I would, like, lock myself out of the email, because I had issues with typing and spelling. So then I would go to Zoom meetings, and I would say, like, 50% of the time I could follow along, but it was pretty tricky. I didn't, like, speak, I didn't communicate or, like, contribute anything, but I just wanted to kind of be in the loop. 'Cause it was October by this point, so it was a busy time in the semester, so I was, like, kind of trying to juggle everything. Um, I mean, it took, like, a whole, like, 2 hours to just figure out how to, like, set up my out of office message on my email. My dad had to, like, help me, and we had to figure out, like, how to do it so that faculty who were emailing me for help with stuff, like, knew that I was on leave and not available and knew who to contact. But I was very insistent, on going back to work.
Mm. I remember
And
my own condition being in that situation where you're trying to type an email after, for me, it was after the second major bleed, and then having to write an email for work and sitting in front of my computer and struggling probably for what was hours, hours and hours just to write a few lines. And then not being aware of the time that it had taken me, that I had spent sitting there trying to write this
yeah.
email, and then I was getting nowhere. It was pretty intense to have to
Yeah,
put
and I
that much
felt
energy
very
into
much
something.
like I was sort of, like that time feels fuzzy in my memory. You know what I mean? Like, it's not clear. It was
Mm.
all sort of like so I think the, benefit of working part-time was that I just worked, like, a morning, like 9 to 1 or something like that, and then I usually had, like, therapies. I had multiple medical appointments, so then I had, like, I could do those in the morning and go to work in the afternoon, or I could go to those in the morning and, whatever, I could sort of work it out either way. And sometimes I would like go into work for 2 hours and then leave and then come back and like do the other 2 hours.
Was fatigue an issue?
Yeah, and the neurologist didn't tell me about that. No one at the hospital told me about the fatigue. It was actually my physical therapist that said, "Have you been taking naps?" And I was like, "Why?" And she was like, it's important to take naps, recovering from strokes, you're gonna have a lot of fatigue. And I was just like, I think my mom was with me and we were both just sort of like, oh, we didn't know that. And I had been trying to power through the day. because in my mind, it was like, well, I don't want to take a nap. That'll disrupt my sleep cycle. I want to, like, make it through the day and go to bed early.
Mhm.
But then I started taking the naps and working like a half day sort of allowed for that type of thing. I could take a nap at like 3 p.m. or something. And that really helped. But I was surprised that it was the physical therapist who asked, who
Yeah,
brought it up.
there's a lot of people don't know to tell you about that kind of stuff. I don't know why, but it's not in the doctor's
Yeah.
part of the process to tell you about when you go home. These are the things you're going to experience. I really don't think they know what stroke survivors experience. And it's usually the rehabilitation people who know that, because they try and rehabilitate you and they see what you can and can't do. And they see how quickly you might get wiped out after a physical exercise or some exertion in some way. So they see it and then they have to deal with it. And then they've got to kind of set you up to succeed. So helping you succeed, one way to do that, to help you succeed, is to encourage you to sleep more during the day, just to have those nana naps, we call them here in Australia, or cat naps.
Yeah. Yeah. Those really helped with my recovery. And I would say I did those for a few months because I went back to work. I'm gonna say mid-October. So like probably 4 weeks after I had my strokes,
Full time.
part-time.
Part time again. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, right.
I was very anxious to go back to work, but I also couldn't really, so my work agreed to let me work part-time.
And you were 36 years old at the time.
Yeah.
And what was normal life like before the stroke? What did your day consist of? Were you in a relationship? Do you have a family? How did you go about life?
Yeah, well, so I lived in Wichita for 5 years. I moved there in 2019. And I became a librarian a little later. So I was an adjunct professor of writing and rhetoric for 5 years at CU Boulder. And there's no job security when you're an adjunct at all. I mean, they literally don't care if you if you don't come back the next semester. They actively were telling us at some point, like, to take other jobs if we were offered them. So I was like, this is like a dead end. This isn't going anywhere for me. There's no job security here. I don't have any. I did have health insurance, which is why I stayed at that job. You had to teach 2 classes to qualify for health insurance. And a lot of universities in Colorado, it's that you have to be teaching a full course load, so 4 classes to qualify for health insurance. So it was a big incentive for me because it was also like university health insurance. It was good health insurance. Um, so I did that for 5 years, and then I was trying to think about what else I could do that would offer me more security. And so I figured out that I could go for 2 years, get a library science degree, and then I could work as an academic librarian, and I could do what I was basically already doing, which is teach students how to do research.
Uh-huh.
So my department at CU worked really closely with the library. So a lot of principles of library instruction were built into the curriculum of the classes that I was teaching. So I was already familiar with them. So it was like a very easy transition. So I did that for 2 years, 2017 to 2019. And then I, graduated and I had a lot of job interviews and I went to a lot of places and considered a lot of jobs. But then I eventually accepted the offer from Wichita State and I went there in 2019. So I would say, it was a little rough in 2019, like 2019 to 2020, because that was leading into the pandemic. So I didn't really have any friends other than my coworkers who were all very nice people, and they still are very nice people. But I didn't really like know anyone. I befriended my neighbor Jesse, who ended up taking me to the hospital. And I was kind of like just starting to like join book clubs and like go out a little more and explore. When the whole university shut down March 2020. Um,
Um, yeah. So how did you guys go about, were you still employed in those times where you were shut, where your workplace was shut down? Were you still able to be employed?
yes. So it was pretty unusual in the state of Kansas at a university. For us, we stayed employed, and they didn't. A lot of universities, I forget what they call it, but it's like they dock like 10% of your pay or something. Um, like you don't work for a week and then they can like not pay you for that week. So it works out for them.
Mhm.
Um, and a lot of people's salaries were getting cut. So our salaries stayed the same, and the administrators at the university, like the dean of the library, the administrators all agreed to just take 2 weeks off in the summer so that they could save the university money and that kind of balance things out. So we were working remotely from March until May. The library was closed, like not open to the public, you know, like we were just fully remote. And then in May 2020, they insisted that we open.
Okay. So in May 2020, you're back at work. The
Well,
library's,
we actually continued to work remotely.
uh-huh.
So as a faculty librarian, I I'm able to do my job. I was able to do my job like from home. Like I could do emails from home, I
Mhm.
could do instruction from home, like via Zoom, and we could do chat reference, which is basically, how we provided reference services during the pandemic, was just virtual reference, and we could do that from home too. So we kind of took these like 4-hour shifts where like you'd be on reference from like 9 to 1, and then someone else would be on reference from 1 to 5, so that it was a big chunk of time, and you were just home, so, like, it was fine. So there were people that had to come into the library and work, staff, um, who had to physically be there, but we didn't, and I don't think we really went back until 2021
Uh-huh.
is when we were starting to go back in person.
Okay. So that didn't really interfere with your stroke recovery or accessing services when you did have the stroke in 2022. What month was that?
September.
September. So was everything kind of back to normal work-wise and pandemic-wise?
It was, but, it's interesting because, I was wearing a mask at work, so people couldn't see that I had the left cheek was drooped,
Mm,
um, and we were having our meetings on Zoom still, our, like, department meetings, I guess. We would have them, like, once every other week or whatever, and we were still doing those remotely, so, like, people weren't physically seeing my face in person, it was still, like, removed a little bit. Um, so because we were all kind of wearing masks and being careful. That was 2022. I mean, because it just continued. It
but
continued, so, I mean, we just had to keep wearing masks because
yeah.
the university insisted that we be
So
open.
was that an issue because then your colleagues didn't quite understand what you were going through and it
Yeah,
was difficult for you to navigate that?
yeah, and, it was interesting because when I was in my apartment and I was just, like, with my neighbor, like, I didn't wear a mask because it was just the 2 of us. We weren't,
Mm,
like, in a public in a library that was open to the public where there were, like, hundreds of people every day. So, like, that's when someone actually noticed, when I wasn't wearing a mask and when I was with someone and I was, like, you know, sort of close. My coworkers kinda knew something was going on because I was, like, bursting into tears in a Zoom meeting and saying, I don't know what's going on with me, but I need your help. I can't do my job," and all this stuff. So they knew something was up, but I told them what the doctor told me. I said, "Doctor says I have a pinched nerve in my neck. So, I guess this is what that looks like."
mhm. So
So I think that they were concerned, certainly. But they were like, "Well, she's young. How bad can it be?"
Yeah. How do you find people react to you when you say you've had a stroke or a multiple strokes? How do they respond? People that don't associate younger
Right.
people with strokes, how do they deal with that?
Um, Usually they're surprised. Um, they say, "You're so young," or they say, "You don't." I didn't have I would say I had some, drop foot on my left foot afterwards, and the occupational therapy and physical therapy was helpful for that, and I had, like, weakness in my left arm, but, like, other than that, I don't have any physical, I guess, indicators or physical whatever you would call them,
Deficits.
after effects. Yeah,
Deficits.
yeah.
And therefore, you don't look like somebody who's had a stroke as well as that. A, you're too young. B, you don't look like you've had a stroke. And people just can't connect the two.
Yeah. So I would say there's a lot of surprise. Usually elderly people, they have had strokes or they know someone who's had a stroke, and so they understand a little bit more. But I would say people that are young, under 50, um, they tend to be very surprised. And there was a woman I actually met, and I was having a conversation with her in a bookstore. So it was just an informal conversation about books. Um, and because she came in looking for one book and they didn't have it, and I told her, "You know what? You should really get this other book by the same author." So we started talking and I said, "You'll probably be surprised by this, but I actually had multiple strokes, and that's why I've moved back to Colorado to be near my family." And she said, "I actually wouldn't be surprised," because she said that when she was in college, one of her close friends had a stroke,
Mhm.
and he was a runner. So it was completely out of the ordinary, and he was very healthy, and then he, like, collapsed one day.
Mhm. Yeah.
So
It is common but rare for younger people to have a stroke, and other people who are have been luckily enough to escape stroke and they're as old as you were or even older might be surprised by that, especially if you don't look like you've had a stroke. Stroke looks
yeah.
like people can't walk properly. It looks like there's a problem with somebody's arm. It looks like there's a problem with the way they speak or the way that their mouth looks. And it looks like you've recovered quite well. Do you have any ongoing long-term deficits that you're still overcoming or you're working to overcome?
Yeah, so I did actually leave my position at the university, at the end of January. So technically, like, February 2nd or something, but, like, end of January, beginning of February, I left my position, because I was going through a major depressive episode, which is probably, like, linked to brain damage from the strokes, but they were just throwing all sorts of meds at me, and we couldn't get good mental health care in Wichita, in Kansas at all. It's just was terrible there. So I decided to move back to Colorado, like, without a job, to move back to Colorado just to be near my family. And I'm living with my parents right now. Um, and what was your question? Yeah,
Are you
I think I answered your question.
are you still
uh,
living with
yeah,
deficits?
yeah. So executive functioning. So that was very damaged in the strokes, and I did go to see a neuropsychologist, and I actually went to see her. I requested that I be referred to a neuropsychologist after I listened to your podcast, because you
Mhm.
interviewed someone who I wanna say was from New Zealand, and it was a woman, and she said that when she went to see her PCP, and there was, like, a history of stroke in her family, or it seemed likely that she'd had strokes or a stroke. She said, "But I'm talking funny," and her doctor said, "But don't all Kiwis talk funny?"
Mhm. I think I
And she said
remember.
later he felt bad about that and apologized to her and stuff, and I was like, "That's very similar to what happened to me," because I asked my doctor if it was possible that I had meningitis because of the terrible headache. And that's just
Ah,
all you hear about meningitis. I mean, it's mostly with college students, but, like, you just hear that they have a terrible headache, and then they go to bed and they don't wake up. So I was very I think understandably paranoid considering what had actually happened, but I was very paranoid, and I asked her if I had meningitis, if it was possible. And she basically said, "No, you would be, like, a lot sicker than you are
mhm.
if you had meningitis."
Yeah, it's a little bit more debilitating because I think it affects the whole brain because the infection makes the brain swell and then causes real major challenges really quickly. So, with executive function, according to Google search, the phrase executive function refers to a set of skills. These skills underlie the capacity to plan ahead and meet goals, display self control, follow multiple step directions, even when interrupted, and stay focused despite distractions, amongst others. So, does that description describe the things that you're challenging, that you're finding challenging to deal with?
Yeah. So, I think my job required a lot of executive functioning.
Mm.
My title was actually the coordinator of library instructional services, which is a long title, and so I had to coordinate a lot of things. I coordinated a workshop series. I coordinated instruction for a first year writing class. The librarians would teach library session for all of the sections of that class. And I was responsible for creating the lesson plan and doing an assessment of the students and all of that stuff. So I was really struggling when I went back um, full time in this last fall, so fall 2023. So
It-
I went to the neuropsychologist. She said, "You're cleared to go back to work." She did cognitive assessments of me. And she said that my limits were in my executive functioning. But she felt that as long as my job didn't require me to be able to respond to things quickly. Her example was like an air traffic control person. Like, she was like, "If your job was doing, like, air traffic control, you wouldn't be able to go back to work. But your job does not require that kind of, like, split second thinking,
Mhm.
so I think you should be fine." And, I think I was just in the fall, in, like, September, November, October, I guess, I was, like, struggling with things that I didn't struggle with before my strokes. And I honestly think that I was in denial for quite a while after I had the strokes. Like, I knew I'd had them, but, like, I was very determined to not let them affect my life. Like, I wanted to go back to how things were before. And my speech therapist, and I actually stayed in speech therapy for a long time. I think I was in speech therapy for 6 months, from like November, October until April. And she sort of tried to broach this topic with me of like, well, you're telling me about your job, and it sounds very demanding. And I don't know if it's something that you can continue to do with the limitations that you have. You have limitations with attention, focus, like memory, like all of these things that, we're working on. It seems like that would affect your ability to do this job that you have. Um, And I think I just found that that was in fact true. I mean, she was right, right?
Was there
But
evidence? Was there evidence that it was true? For example, were your colleagues commenting on your ability to carry out your work tasks? Was anyone saying she's not pulling her weight? Anyone giving you any feedback whatsoever?
no, I think and I don't know, so what I do know is that I was dropping the ball on a lot of things. So I would write myself a to-do list, and I would write like, email so and so, or like download these sheets, these responses, and email them to faculty. And then like a week later, I would look at that and I'd be like, "Oh, I didn't do that. I'll do it later." And then a week later, it was just the same thing over and over and over again. And then it's like November, and I actually took FMLA leave to stay at home because I was not functioning. And I was like, it's how is it November and I haven't done this thing that I was supposed to do in September? Like, what happened?
That
And
reminds
so
me of me.
yeah, it was sort of like the signs were there, but I think that because I was a very reliable and responsible employee, um, everyone just assumed I was still fine because I came back to work and I said I was fine. And I spoke to my supervisor and I said, because I had to ask them to allow me to work part-time for the rest of that year, 2022. So I actually worked part-time from when I got back to work in October until May. So the rest of the semester. And, I said, I want to get this cognitive assessment done, you know, and make sure before I actually go back to full time. And he said that was fine. So I did that. And then, when we spoke later, he said, Maria, you're not one of those employees that like people are continually saying that you're never here. That can be a problem with some librarians. And I have had, coworkers and colleagues and stuff that has been an issue with them where they're just never in their office. And faculty come looking for them and you don't know where they are and all of that stuff. And because I was still coming every day, even though I went back to working part-time, um, in December, I think. I went back in December and I went back to working part-time. Like I was still coming every day and like emailing my supervisor and keeping him updated about things.
So
I
people
think that
didn't notice your absence, and therefore they didn't really clue on to the fact that you were not at your best performance, like you
yeah,
weren't performing the best. You probably knew that more than they did. You may have had
yeah.
comparison of your previous capability and then your newest capability, and you're going, well, there's something not right there.
Yeah, and I think I thought that if I like worked hard enough, I could fix it. Like I could get back to the way I was before.
Mm.
So there was a lot of denial happening. Um and it was actually, me, I didn't get fired. It was me that chose to leave my job and resign. Um, and I was very like conflicted about that at the time, but I was like, okay, I can't continue to do this job anymore. This was in early 2024, so like January. I was like, I'm not doing my job right now, you know, and my coworkers, they're all have taken on some of my responsibilities, my duties. Like, and we were working on changing my job description so that like my duties would change so that my job was more manageable for me, which I appreciate very much. I think Wichita State was very, what's the word I want?
Accommodating.
Yes, thank you. um, They were very accommodating. They worked really well with me, on things. So that was all happening in January, and I was like, "At this point, I'm not really even doing my job anymore. My coworkers are doing my job, so it's not like I'm doing it, and then if I leave, there's no one to do it. They're already doing it. So why am
It
I
was
here?" I don't know. And I was pretty rough by the end of January. I was really not functioning. I was on a mood stabilizer. Um, and subsequently after going off of it, things changed a lot for me. And the psychiatrist doctor who prescribed that medication said, I think maybe it wasn't good for you. And I was like, yeah, maybe it wasn't good for me.
mhm.
Um, because I think that they looked at these issues I was having, these impulsive decisions and like issues with coordinating my schedule and all of this stuff. And they were like, "Oh, this is, she's not being consistent. There's some kind of mental health issue here." So they were trying to treat that without really considering what the how much was caused by the stroke. You know what I mean? Strokes plural.
Yeah. They underestimated the possibility that stroke was causing mental health issues, or was the kind of thing that needed to be resolved or to help support you in that space so that you could be better mentally. It's not
Yeah,
necessarily I woke up and I had mental health issues. There was an underlying cause. But
yeah,
sometimes people in those types of spaces don't look at they look at the symptoms, right? And they don't look at the cause. And then they treat the symptoms. Here's a medication,
yeah,
and hopefully the symptom that you're feeling or the thoughts that you're having or the challenges that you've got will go away if we give you this thing. And then it gives you a temporary reprieve from the symptoms, but it never has actually dealt with the root cause.
yeah, because I really felt, I felt very flattened, like, I didn't feel like I had a lot of energy or motivation. I couldn't even, like, really be expressive with my face at some point. Like, I was just,
Mm,
monotone and, like, because it felt like and I would talk to people and I could tell, like, that they were expecting something different from me, and I couldn't give it to them, and I was like, "I don't." It's like I've run out of battery, like, I don't have anything left to, like, be animated and, like, make eye contact with you and do all of these things that would indicate to you that I'm listening and that I'm, paying attention and active,
mm.
and so, at that point, I was just totally depleted, and I would say I was barely speaking. I mean, I would answer questions when I was asked, but I'm a very talkative person, and I was, like, barely speaking.
You
So
described that really well, running out of battery. A lot of stroke survivors use that term to describe what happens when they're fatigued. And I've even seen an image, some stroke survivors have typed an image with, the battery indicator that shows, five green bars and then three of the green bars are missing and there's only two left. And then it's like, I don't, I'm conserving the rest of the energy of that battery
yeah,
to get through the rest of the day. And it's only midday. So if you're
yeah.
expecting me to talk or respond or be
Laugh.
upbeat or laugh, I'm probably not going to be. And it's nothing to do with you. It's just got to do with how I feel. But people who don't have been through what we've been through just can't grasp it, that don't get it.
Yeah, and it made me, like, not wanna be at work, and I mean, working part-time helped with that, but, the way things were at Wichita State was that they wanted us in the library who were those of us who worked in the library to still be in the library, 5 days a week, in person,
Yeah.
to the extent that we could,
And
and that is not the case at other academic libraries.
uh-huh. And you're dealing with details that are pretty full on. Like people want to know, you want you to direct them to a piece of literature that is related to something that they are trying to get to the bottom of or to research. And that requires a lot of brain
Yeah,
uh, energy. As well as that, you're doing that for multiple people a day. It wouldn't be just for one person. And then that would be, I remember what it was like just trying to write my book. Or I remember the struggle of sitting there and trying to find data conf- to support my statements, and how long and how difficult and how arduous that was. And I'd never gone to university or studied for a degree or anything like that, so I didn't understand the extent of the effort that you had to put in. Uh, but I went. It took, and that's what took me a good part of 2 years to do. Like it took me 2 years to get to the point where I was able to gather all the information on this book that I was writing. And I found that I did that. I wasn't working constantly for 2 years. What I was doing was picking my moments so that if I had a good 2 weeks of energy, I would work as much as I could and get as much done in that 2 weeks, because then I knew there was another 3 or 4 weeks coming up where nothing was going to get done.
yeah, yeah, and, what was interesting for me after the strokes was, I went back to work part-time, but my job was very much, I remember speaking to a coworker at one time, and I was like, it's tough because, like, I have, permission. I'm allowed to be here half time. And and the university figured out a way to get me paid for those other 4 hours that I wasn't, because I was out of paid leave at that
Hmm.
point. I'd
Hmm.
exhausted it. So there was a program through the state of Kansas that I could apply for, and I did, and they would allow me to work 4 4 hours a day, and the other 4 would be covered. But,
Wow.
like, I was like, "Okay, but, like, this job, like, it doesn't reduce the amount of work I have," you know? Like, working 4 hours a day doesn't change the fact that, like, I have other stuff I need to do, and I'm just not doing it, you
Mm,
know?
mm,
So,
mm,
that was kind of hard. Like, I was getting emails from faculty and requests to do instruction and all of this stuff, and I had to kind of, like, figure out what to prioritize, like, what I had energy for. And I really appreciate my coworkers at Wichita because every time I asked them for help, they helped me. And so I actually team taught, like, 2 of us teaching, um, maybe 3 or 4 times in the spring semester. So that would have been 2023 in the spring, because I had these classes scheduled that had been scheduled in the fall. And I didn't feel confident enough teaching them on my own, because teaching is very much like you can't hide. Like, you're there and the students see you, and if you don't know the answer to something, they can tell.
very
And so
demanding as well.
yeah. And so I had a coworker teach with me each time that I taught, and that really helped, me feel like, "Okay, this is manageable." And they would also kind of, like, maybe step in or, like, answer questions or, kind of supplement, add to, stuff that I'd missed,
Mhm.
and that was helpful. But, so in technically, the field that I'm in is library and in information science, um, and I don't think a lot of people really know what that is, especially not in America. I mean, when I tell people that I'm a librarian, the first response is like, "Well, but do people even read books anymore? Like, do they even need libraries?" And I have to be like, they do. They do read, and people need libraries, and they use libraries for things other than reading, you know?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so then people are surprised that there's actually programs. There's, library schools, that I would sort of say, "Oh, I went to library school," as in, like, I went to a university and got a graduate degree in library and information science, and they're always, like, surprised by that, and they're like, "What did you even study?" And it is, about, so one field is information behavior, so that's how people seek out information. And there's lots of, like, models. I have a whole textbook of models of how people seek out information, because it's a very popular field. And so part of that is information seeking. So, like, when someone comes into the library, they're seeking information, how do they go about doing that? So, one concept that actually is pretty popular is the concept of serendipity. So that's like when, faculty usually do this. I would say students don't usually go into the stacks to get books. It's usually faculty or grad students. They'll go to retrieve a book, and they want to have the call number, the Library of Congress call number, which is what we use in academic libraries. And they want that specifically. They don't wanna put in a request and have that book pulled for them, which they can do. I did it all the time, you know? I had books pulled for me, but they wanna go in and they wanna look at all the books that are cataloged, like, shelved next to that book because they're gonna be about the same topic.
Ah, so they have an idea for a book because there's perhaps a piece of literature that they're familiar with by a particular author, and then they know that if I go to that particular author, to the left and to the right of that author, there's going to be a whole bunch of other authors that talk about the same type of topic.
Yeah, and so, that's called, ooh, sorry. That's just an alarm on my phone.
Mhm.
Um, that's like the idea of serendipity. Like, it seems, at least to you, when you're going in and looking at these call numbers, that you find books, like, serendipitously, like, just there it is, but it's not, it's not really serendipity because it's actually, like, they're placed next to each other for a reason because they, belong in that certain section.
Uh-huh.
So, I, as a librarian, was, like, very fascinated with how I, as a stroke survivor, had to figure out how to find information about strokes, like, what to do.
Mhm.
I mean, I was lost. I think a lot of survivors are lost. Like, you have your physical therapist or your occupational therapist, whoever, your rehab people are, but, like, I mean, my neurologist was not very responsive, to put it, like, politely. He tried to
Your n
cancel an appointment once because he wanted to go on vacation.
your neurologist wasn't very responsive to your need for follow-up, for information, what wasn't.
Um, yeah, so in the appointments would only last 15 or 20 minutes, and I would ask things like, "Am I more likely to have another stroke? Seems like something I should be concerned about."
Mm.
And he would say, "You're more likely to have a stroke now than you were before you had your first stroke."
Statistically, somebody who's had an ischemic stroke is very much more at risk of another stroke after the first one. Um,
Right.
Neurologists tend not to do a lot of the kind of work that we hope they would do. A lot of stroke survivors go back to neurologists for information and they don't get a lot of satisfaction. And it's not because the neurologists don't have,
Right.
I think we go to them for the wrong reasons. Usually,
Yeah.
neurologists work with a medical team. They can look at a scan and they can say, this is what it looks like has happened. Perhaps these are some courses of action that you might want to take, but they're
Mhm.
really an intermediary between you and the doctors, and they don't really do much with the patient other than perhaps check in on you and just see how things are going and understand um, that level of kind of where you're at, but they don't really get involved with much of the medical side of the process. And I suppose what they might be best doing sometimes is referring you along to other people who are more likely to help if
Yeah.
they know who to refer to.
Yeah. And I also asked him how many strokes I'd had because at the hospital they just kept saying multiple. And he said that it didn't matter how many strokes I'd had. That, my brain had just been damaged in some way and it was gonna, like, and I asked the question, like, "Well, can I go back and do my job? Can I go back to work?" And he was like, "I don't know."
Yeah. It's
I mean, he
for
was being honest.
it's for a neuropsych to evaluate your ability, for example, if whether or not your executive function is up to the task or not. And that's the thing. It's like when you're a stroke survivor, you don't know where to go and who to get information from. So you ask the person
Yeah.
that you came across the first time, which might have been a doctor or a neurologist, and you hope that they can be a little more forthcoming with at least some kind of feedback other than them be blank and say, I don't know. And even
Yeah.
though that's the truth and that may be the answer, that
Right.
should be, I don't know. And then I don't know, but I don't know. And maybe, and then just sort of give you guidance as to where to start the conversation and with the next person, who the next person might be. That's the part
Right.
that I struggle with. They're so specialized, they have no idea who else can support a stroke survivor in their recovery. And even if they get it wrong and they say you need to go and see a neuropsych, and
Right.
perhaps it wasn't a neuropsych that you needed to see, well, who cares? At least
Right.
um, you're going through the process of getting the conversation started and you're ticking off things and then you're narrowing down who it is that's going to be more likely to be able to support you and help you overcome those challenges, whatever they are, physical for some people, cognitive
Yeah.
for others, speech for others. Um, so they can, it is a little disappointing. Some people do get disappointed with their neurologist, but it's because we expect too much from them and we don't know
Mm,
where else to go. That's the
yeah.
thing that I've
Well,
found.
I had to actually ask him to refer me to the neuropsychologist.
Yeah.
But, because of your podcast, then and so, I had to information seek, and I found
Yeah.
your podcast because I listen to podcasts anyway. So I was like, "Okay, so if I listen to podcasts anyway, why don't I search and see if there's any stroke podcasts?"
Mhm.
And I found your podcast, and, I think I discovered the American Stroke Association website. They have a warm line that you can call, so you
Mhm.
call and you leave a message and someone will call you back in a few days. I utilize that. Um, but I actually ended up buying, Hope After Stroke, that book by the doctor that you interviewed. And I listened to that interview, and then I went out and I bought the book, and I told my mom that she had to buy it. So we have 2 copies now, but, because I was like, "Finally," like a actual something about what to do after a
Mhm.
stroke. And so I was kind of like just doing what like a librarian does. I like found a podcast, I found a book, I found out about the neuropsychologist, and she asked me when I met with her, you know, she said, "Well, how were you referred here? Why did your neurologist refer you?" And I said, "He didn't actually. I had to call and request that he refer me." And his nurse said she didn't know what a neuropsychologist was. So,
That's a bit rough.
yeah, and, there was a lack of neurologists in Wichita, which is apparently, like, a well-known problem. You don't find that out until after you need a neurologist. Um, but there also was a lack of neuropsychologists, so I just went to one, and she told me that she was the only one other than the one that worked at the VA, and he could only work with veterans.
Wow.
He
Wow.
was, like, the only option, and fortunately, she was very nice, and
That's
very
a
helpful.
common problem worldwide. Like in Australia, if you have an appointment to see a neurologist, if it's through the public system, not a neurologist, a uh, neuropsychologist,
Mm,
you could wait 9 months to see a neuropsych. It's such a long time to wait when you're in dire straits and you're not thinking properly and you don't know how to help yourself. And
yeah,
I remember waiting 9 months for me to see a neuropsychologist after my counselor suggested I see a neuropsych. My psychologist suggested I see a neuropsych because she realized in our conversations that there was things amiss and that I wasn't able to begin and finish sentences. And what I didn't
right,
know, because we just weren't thinking straight, what I didn't know was that I could get a private appointment to
right,
see a neuropsych and pay $500 or more or whatever it was
right,
at the time, um, and speed up that process and get to see them sooner so that they could help me quicker. I didn't know that you could do that. But the test for a neuropsych evaluation is such a long process, and the report writing later on is such a long process that what I've realized recently to see a neuropsych and to get a neuropsychological assessment done, it can be up to about $2,000. So
wow,
it's prohibitive from a cost perspective, especially when you've had a stroke and money's an issue. Um, and then it's also, you need to know, you need to get lucky and find the right piece of information to tell you that you should see a neuropsych. And then you need to learn what a neuropsych does and how they're different from a psychologist and what their role is in supporting you. And it's such a jigsaw puzzle and such a, a,
yeah,
a it's such a task to just work out all those things. And I never had podcasts to listen to. I didn't
yes,
have many books to read and write when I started going through this. So I had to really uncover it myself. One of our biggest tasks was research. I think our biggest task in this recovery process was research, and
Yeah.
then hitting brick walls when you took that research to your doctor and then they didn't know what the hell you were talking about because nobody had ever gone to them with that bit of information about stroke, and they were just a general practitioner, and they hoped you would just go to the next person and the next person would help you, and they were better off not having you in their practice. That's how I felt anyway.
Yeah, I certainly felt that way, a little bit. The neurologist eventually referred me to a vascular specialist, and
Mm.
he said, "So I think we're done. You don't need to continue to see me. I think you have to go see this vascular surgeon."
Hmm.
Because they discovered or determined, I should say, the cause of my strokes. It was a dissection in my carotid artery, on my right side.
Ah, wow. Okay.
So that was in January. So I had the strokes in September, and then they waited a few months to then do a CT scan, a follow-up CT scan in January. And, they got the results, and he said, "So it's clear, now that there's not, like, a bunch of, blood and stuff in the CT scan, we can see that you have." So he said it was, a pseudoaneurysm, so not an aneurysm, but just like a bump or an abnormality in my carotid artery, and I actually have one in both carotid arteries, on the right and the left.
So have you been diagnosed a blood thinner? Not but diagnosed, prescribed a blood thinner?
I was, and so I was prescribed a blood thinner after the strokes and baby aspirin, and they told me after they figured out the cause to stay on the baby aspirin and to go off of the Plavix or, whatever it was.
Mm.
So, and they said I would have to be on that for the rest of my life, which is fine. You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. It's a small price to pay to have to decrease dramatically your risk of another clot.
Yeah.
Um, did it help when you found out what the cause was? Did that kind of help?
It did a little bit, but it was kind of frustrating because first off, my family, I mean, my parents are scientists, so they know a little bit. My dad worked at the med school, so University of Colorado Health Sciences Center, which is based in Aurora in Colorado. So he worked there, so he like knows a lot of doctors, but he's not a doctor himself. And so we were like, what is a pseudoaneurysm? Like, we've never even heard of that. And then it was sort of like, okay, what's a dissection? Didn't know what that was, and then what does this mean? And by the time I made it to the vascular specialist, it was a few months, and he was very nice. And he said, this could be fibromuscular dysplasia, but it might not be. There isn't really a test for FMD, so I can't give you a test. And my recommendation is just that we monitor it.
Yeah. That's
So,
okay. That's good. That
yeah,
is a really good outcome. Now that you know its cause and you have somebody who knows about these things and that they can help you monitor it and keep an eye on it, that's a really good outcome. I like that. What was
yeah.
the hardest thing about stroke for you?
I think it was actually like basically maybe a year after the strokes when I went through this depressive episode.
Mm.
And because I convinced myself that I recovered from the strokes and I was fine. That's what, like the whole summer, that summer had been like great. And, my brother had a baby, so I have a nephew. And so like we were all excited about that and all this stuff. And so I, had traveled all summer, I'd done really well. I got to see a bunch of people. So I felt like I'd recovered. So like it was over. And then it was like, okay, maybe maybe it's not over. it's not something that I can, like, beat, I guess. It's not something that I can, like, overcome. I think maybe this is just how I am now.
Mhm. Mhm. So what
Um,
has I was gonna say, what has stroke taught you?
um, so I would say that, and I get asked this, kind of a lot, but, or I get asked some variation of that question, but I think that I was very judgmental before I had my strokes of
Ooh.
other people. I
Mhm.
didn't have a lot of patience. And it was sort of like, well, if I can do it, then why can't you do it? That kind of attitude.
Mhm.
And I mean, I'm a very type A personality. Like I was like, did very well in high school, and then I went to a good school for college. I went to a women's college actually. And I got straight A's there, and then I wrote a thesis and I did well on my thesis and I went to grad school in Colorado and I got straight A's in grad school. And then I went back to grad school for a library science degree and I got straight A's there. So I felt like I like knew, you know, I knew everything. And I
Mhm.
didn't understand why more people couldn't, be like me or whatever. I don't know a better way to put it, but I feel like I was very harsh. And I think it created some problems for me when I started my job because that was my first library job out of library school was Wichita State. So I had never like I worked in a library at University of Illinois, which is where I went for my degree. I worked as a graduate assistant, so I did work in a library there. But this was like my first time having a full-time tenure track faculty librarian position. And so I think there was some ruffled feathers at first. Um, but after the strokes, it was like I couldn't do anything. Like, I couldn't teach, I had trouble with reference. I had trouble getting dressed, had trouble putting on clothing and like, you know, one time I showed up to the reference desk to do my shift and it was like 1:30 and my coworker was like, "What are you doing here?" And I was like, "Oh, my shift starts at 2." And he was like, "Right." It's 1:30. And I was like, "Oh, I wanted to get here early." Like, that sense of time, you know? And it was just like, it was like, "Okay, well, I'd wanna, like, leave my office probably at, like, maybe 1:50, 1:55, so I could walk over to the desk and be there by 2, but, like, I just left at 1:30. So, it was stuff like that that I then needed other people's help with because I couldn't
Mhm.
do everything. I wasn't, like, a smarty pants anymore.
You weren't
You know?
perfect anymore.
Yeah. Very
Yeah,
much so.
that's a pretty big lesson, and it's understandable. A lot of stroke survivors say that they learned to be more patient with other people, and they had a deeper understanding of what it was like to be somebody who was struggling. I certainly had to live in a wheelchair for a short amount of time, probably about 3.5, 4 weeks, and then I quickly understood that people in wheelchairs are not just sitting down, which is what I assumed they were doing. They were just sitting down, no big deal. It didn't mean anything. So it's pretty crazy that I had to learn that way, but I'm glad I learned that. So there'll be people listening, hoping to get a little bit of a nugget out of this episode if they already haven't picked up a few. What would you say to somebody who's just started their recovery and are going through this and are struggling a little bit? What would you be one piece of advice you could leave them with?
I would say, take your time in recovery. Don't let anyone rush you and don't rush yourself. Because I very much did that. Like, my parents were trying to get me to slow down and I was just like trying to get right back to work and do all this stuff. But you have to take the time. Because and I had to actually go to therapy to learn this, but like sometimes your plan A doesn't work out for like whatever reason. And my plan A was like getting a tenure track faculty position at a university and then going up for tenure. and hopefully, like, right, getting tenure and having job security for life. And that is not it's not gonna happen. It's not I'm a different person now, so I have to come up with the plan B of, like, what I'm gonna do now that I have these limitations or whatever you wanna call them with my executive functioning and issues with mental health and things like that, um, because I think if I had taken the time to really process what had happened to me and maybe stayed away from work, like, for longer, because I think that, the reality is that they would have gotten on without me. Like, like, it wouldn't the library would not have fallen apart, like, they would have been able to continue to function. They didn't actually need me. I could have stayed home for longer and decided, you know, do I wanna do this job or not? Because I have been told, and this is all informal, but I've been told that if I had applied for disability before I went back to work, I would have probably qualified for it easily because of the fact that I had this extensive brain damage. And they told me, I think to 3 parts of my brain, like the front, whatever this is, and then the back, like, major parts of my brain,
Mhm.
um, that I would have gotten disability easily. But you couldn't have told me that at that time because I was, like, very focused on going back to work. And so I went back to work and then, I don't have that job now, but I have other things going on and I probably will continue to, like, have jobs or work at some to some degree. But I realize that I have to, like, have different types of jobs that are more flexible, that, like, allow me, to maybe work remotely on certain days when I'm not feeling well or having mental health struggles or, to work part-time jobs, because health insurance is a big thing, and until the Affordable Care Act was passed in the US, I mean, like, you had to have a job to have health insurance,
Mhm.
and now that's not the case, and I'm, for the first time, benefiting from that. Because I do have income, I have some from January, and I also, like, have, other jobs and other things I've been doing, so I qualify for, health insurance through the Affordable Care Act, and now I don't have to worry about getting a full-time job so I can have health insurance. I can
Right.
just, like, work part-time,
Yeah.
you know? Um, but I really created a lot of stress for myself and, like, strife and struggle, so, like, all the S words, by, like, not taking the time after the strokes to really process them.
Yeah. That's excellent advice. Maria, thank you so much for reaching out and being on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Well, I wanna thank you for doing the podcast. As, like, a stroke survivor and a listener of the podcast, I think it's really important and significant, and you have said that, like, you do it because you feel like there's this lack, like, this gap between, like, advice people get when they have the strokes and then, like, what do they do, like, after? Like, there's nothing to help them. And the people that need this information, like, aren't necessarily getting the stroke prevention information. So, like, this is a way to provide that information. Like, who knew about stroke ambulances?
Yeah. Who knew about all the things that have been discussed on the last 300 and something episodes? I mean,
Yeah.
I certainly didn't. I didn't need to know. So I was oblivious and, comfortably oblivious. No problem. I didn't need to know. So, but I was in dire straits, at one point, and I needed information and I still need information. And I feel like it's necessary for other people to have information. And I think it's part of my role now. And also, I need to talk to people that are going through what I'm going through because, as much as a long time has elapsed since my first incident, it was
Right.
12 years ago, and nobody that I know still wants to hear me talk about it for 12 years on. No
Yeah.
one. No one really does. And it's not
Right.
saying anything about them. Um, it's just that it gets boring when I talk about it to my family and friends all the time and all that kind of stuff. Like it's just, they can't,
Yeah.
they're all thankfully healthy and well, and
Yeah.
they cannot relate. And, it's yawn territory if I start talking about that kind of stuff with them. So I need other people to talk to about it. It's the thing I lack the most is I lack people who understand me. And I find that I get them on the podcast. They understand me, I understand them, and that makes my life a little easier and my mental health a little better. And I also feel like I'm being useful, and I couldn't do it without you guys. So, me talking about stroke on my own on a podcast to the world would be pretty boring. I need other guests, and I'm so glad that I reached out on Instagram and got inundated. Now I've got the work ahead of me. I got inundated. I'm not kidding you. Like, I think I had 30 responses, and
Wow.
usually that's 30 episodes, and that's more than half of the year. So, thank you for acknowledging me. I really appreciate it, but I want to acknowledge you guys as well. Like, it's a team effort.
Yeah. Well, I think what people need most generally is to not feel alone,
Yeah,
and this really helps with that, this type of podcast. And
I'm glad. Thank you for being on the podcast.
thank you so much for having me.
Well, thanks again for joining us on today's episode. I hope you enjoyed my chat with Maria and found inspiration in her journey of advocating for proper medical care and overcoming the challenges of stroke recovery. If you're interested in my book about stroke recovery, you can grab a copy on Amazon by visiting recoveryafterstroke.com/book. To learn more about Maria, including her social media links, and to download the full transcript of the interview, head over to recoveryafterstroke.com/episodes. A huge thank you to everyone who has left a review. It means the world to me. Reviews are crucial for podcasts to thrive, and feedback helps others find this valuable content, making their stroke recovery journey a little easier. If you haven't left a review yet, please consider leaving a 5-star review and a few words about what the show means to you on iTunes and Spotify. If you are watching on YouTube, leave a comment below, like the episode, and subscribe to the show on your preferred platform to get notifications of future episodes. If you are a stroke survivor with a story to share, come and join me on the show. The interviews are unscripted and you do not require to plan for them. Just be yourself and share your experience and help others in a similar situation to you. If you have a commercial product that supports stroke survivors in their recovery, you can join me on a sponsored episode of the show. Just visit recoveryafterstroke.com/contact, fill out the form, and I will get back to you with details on how we can connect via Zoom. Thanks again for being here and listening. I truly appreciate you. See you on the next episode.
Importantly, we present many podcasts designed to give you an insight and understanding into the experiences of other individuals. Opinions and treatment protocols discussed during any podcast are the individual's own experience, and we do not necessarily share the same opinion, nor do we recommend any treatment protocol discussed. All content on this website and any linked blog, podcast, or video material controlled this website or content is created and produced for informational purposes only and is largely based on the personal experience of Bill Gasiamis. The content is intended to complement your medical treatment and support healing. It is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice and should not be relied on as health advice. The information is general and may not be suitable for your personal injuries, circumstances, or health objectives. Do not use our content as a standalone resource to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease for therapeutic purposes or as a substitute for the advice of a health professional. Never delay seeking advice or disregard the advice of a medical professional, your doctor, or your rehabilitation rehabilitation program based on our content. If you have any questions or concerns about your health or medical condition, please seek guidance from a doctor or other medical professional. If you are experiencing a health emergency or think you might be, call 000 if in Australia, or your local emergency number immediately for emergency assistance, or go to the nearest hospital emergency department. Medical information changes constantly. While we aim to provide current, quality information in our content, we do not provide any guarantees and assume no legal liability or responsibility for the accuracy, currency, or completeness of the content. If you choose to rely on any information within our content, you do so solely at your own risk. We are careful with links we provide. However, third-party links from our website are followed at your own risk, and we are not responsible for any information you find there.